The air in Altair Airlines' executive boardroom was thick with a palpable dread, a suffocating mix of stale coffee and desperation. A large, oval mahogany table, usually a stage for power plays and strategic triumphs, now stood witness to absolute chaos. Kyle Reed, Vice President of Operations, a man in his late 50s whose once sharp features were now slack with panic, slammed his fist on the table. His eyes, usually cool and calculating, darted around the room, wild with a terror that bordered on abject defeat. How? How could this happen? He roared, his voice cracking, directed at no one and everyone simultaneously. We had it contained. Everything was under control. A massive flat-screen monitor, usually reserved for quarterly financial reports, blared an emergency news bulletin. The anchor's grave voice filled the room, cutting through the murmurs of the shell-shocked executives. Breaking news. The Office of Aviation Standards Compliance, or OASC, has issued an unprecedented directive, temporarily suspending all flights for Altair Airlines, effective immediately. The regulatory body cites numerous and systematic violations of operational protocols and discriminatory practices as the primary reasons for this drastic measure. This comes amidst an ongoing internal investigation that has rocked the aviation industry. Kyle watched, mesmerized, as a split screen showed a graphic of an Altair Airlines plane grounded, juxtaposed with the stern, unyielding logo of the OASC. His gaze then fell to the thick, government-issued report lying open on the table before him. The cover, stark white with the OASC emblem, bore a title that seemed to mock him. Comprehensive Audit Report, Altair Airlines. His eyes fixated on a name printed just below the title, seemingly innocuous, yet radiating an unimaginable power, David Ndlovu. A slow, horrifying realization dawned on Kyle's face. His jaw tightened, his eyes widened with dawning horror, and a single, involuntary gasp escaped his lips. The image of a calm, dignified man at a gate, dismissed with a patronizing sneer, flashed in his mind. He had dismissed him as a nuisance, a petty complaint. Now, that same man had brought his entire empire to its knees. The camera zoomed in on Kyle's contorted features, a tableau of a man facing the ultimate, inescapable reckoning. 6 weeks earlier, the pre-dawn chill of a thriving metropolis was David Ndlovu's favorite time. It was a canvas of quiet potential, a few hours before the city's relentless pulse began to pound. At 42, David moved with the understated precision of a man who commanded respect without demanding it. His lean, athletic frame, honed by years of discipline, cut effortlessly through the crisp air as he navigated the tree-lined paths of a quiet park. His breath plumed in the cool air, a steady rhythm mirroring the controlled cadence of his thoughts. Running was his sanctuary, a moving meditation where the complex algorithms of his professional life often found elegant solutions. He wasn't merely a successful entrepreneur. David Ndlovu was a visionary. His company, Synergy Digital, was a quietly revolutionary force in AI-driven data analytics, a firm that specialized in dissecting vast datasets to predict market shifts and optimize logistical networks for multinational corporations. He had built it from the ground up, fueled by an intellect that was both incisive and deeply empathetic, a rare combination that allowed him to see both the numbers and the human stories they represented. His reputation was not built on flamboyant displays of wealth, but on a consistent record of innovation, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Competence, for David, was not just a goal, it was an innate state of being. Back in his minimalist, high-tech apartment, overlooking the waking skyline, David moved with the same efficient grace. A quick, cold shower, a meticulously prepared, healthy breakfast, and then the transition to his workspace. His home office, dominated by multiple screens displaying complex data visualizations, was a testament to his digital empire. He reviewed an email from his lead engineer, flagging a minor bug in a new predictive model. His response was immediate, concise, and offered a solution that 3 senior developers had overlooked. He didn't micromanage. He provided clarity, often with a single, perfectly aimed question. Today was particularly significant. In a few hours, he would be flying to Berlin for the Global Tech Innovators Summit, where he was slated to deliver the keynote address. The subject, ethical AI in a digitally interconnected world. He was presenting Synergy Digital's latest breakthrough, a self-auditing AI system designed to detect and flag algorithmic biases in real time, a tool that promised to revolutionize fairness in everything from credit scoring to criminal justice. He ran through his presentation slides one last time, his eyes scanning for any potential ambiguity, any phrase that might be misconstrued. Every detail was perfect, every potential obstacle considered. He was ready. As he closed his laptop, a brief, contented sigh escaped him. His journey to the airport was planned with the same precision, a comfortable, autonomous vehicle ordered for a specific pickup time. David Ndlovu was a man who believed in systems, well-designed, robust, and fair systems. He trusted them, relied on them, and, in his own work, strived to build them. Little did he know, in a few short hours, a deeply flawed, human-made system was about to collide with his meticulously ordered world, forcing him to activate a far more powerful, unseen mechanism of his own. The automated vehicle delivered David to the sleek, glass-fronted terminal of the international airport precisely on schedule. The hum of controlled chaos, the murmur of countless conversations, the distant announcements echoing through the vast space, the rhythmic whir of luggage carousels, was the familiar symphony of global travel. David moved through it with calm purpose, a single, elegant carry-on bag at his side, containing his presentation laptop, a change of clothes, and a meticulously organized travel kit. He was a seasoned traveler, accustomed to the intricate ballet of airport procedures. He navigated the check-in kiosks with practiced ease, his boarding pass printed in moments. Security followed, a minor inconvenience he approached with the same systematic efficiency. Laptop out, liquids in the clear bag, shoes off, through the scanner. He offered a polite, brief smile to the security agent, who returned it with a nod. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just another passenger, among thousands, going about their day. Once through, David found a quiet corner in the bustling lounge area of his gate, B-23, for Altair Airlines Flight 714 to Berlin. He pulled out his slim, high-performance laptop, the screen a soft glow in the ambient light. A final review of his keynote speech, a quick check of the latest market data relevant to his presentation, and a brief video call with his co-founder, Mark, who wished him luck. The minutes ticked by, each one a testament to his preparedness. The world outside the terminal felt distant, replaced by the self-contained bubble of pre-flight anticipation. Across the sprawling expanse of the terminal, at Gate B-23 itself, Karen Miller was already in position. Her uniform, crisp but worn, seemed to hang a little heavy on her shoulders. At 40-something, her face bore the etched lines of chronic dissatisfaction, a permanent slight downturn to her lips that spoke of years spent dealing with the public. Her eyes, a washed-out blue, held a peculiar blend of weariness and a subtle, almost imperceptible disdain for the endless stream of faces passing before her. Karen was a gate agent for Altair Airlines, a position she'd held for over 15 years. She knew the rules, every single one of them, and sometimes, she felt, she was the rules. There was a certain petty power in her role, a small domain where her word was absolute. She'd seen every type of passenger, the anxious, the entitled, the polite, the rude. And after all this time, she believed she could size them up in an instant, categorizing them, often with a silent, dismissive judgment. She prided herself on being unshakable, impervious to pleas or arguments. It was, in her view, simply her job to maintain order, and sometimes that meant enforcing rules with a rigidity that bordered on cruelty, especially when she sensed an opportunity to exert her authority. She watched the boarding time approach, tapping a manicured, but chipped, nail on the counter, her gaze sweeping over the waiting passengers. She saw the usual mix: families, business travelers, young adventurers. Her eyes lingered for a moment on a woman struggling with an oversized carry-on, then on a group of loud tourists. She sighed, a barely audible puff of air, mentally steeling herself for the coming rush. For Karen, this was just another shift, another predictable parade of humanity to be processed. She was completely unaware that this particular shift, this particular flight, was about to become anything but ordinary. Altair Airlines Flight 714 to Berlin is now boarding all rows, the gate agent's voice announced, tinny over the intercom. A ripple of movement spread through the waiting area. David Ndlovu, his laptop tucked neatly into his carry-on, rose with his usual calm demeanor. He checked his watch, perfectly on time. He approached the gate, a polite, expectant smile on his face, his boarding pass and passport ready in hand. Karen Miller, however, did not return his smile. Her expression was neutral, almost vacant, as David presented his documents. She took them, scanned his boarding pass, and then paused. Her eyes, devoid of warmth, flicked from the screen to David's face, then to his carry-on bag, which rested comfortably at his feet. It was a standard, airline-approved size, well within the limits he had meticulously checked before his trip. "I'm sorry, sir," Karen said, her voice flat, betraying no actual sorrow. "It appears your carry-on bag exceeds the permissible dimensions for this flight." David blinked, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Excuse me? That can't be right. I checked the dimensions online. It's a standard carry-on, and it fit perfectly in the sizer at check-in." Karen gave a small, dismissive shrug, a gesture that conveyed both indifference and absolute finality. "The sizer at check-in is for general guidance. I'm telling you now, at the gate, it's too large. You'll have to check it. But I have my presentation materials in here," David explained, his tone still calm, reasoned. "Sensitive equipment that cannot be checked, and it genuinely meets the requirements." He gestured towards the metal sizer cage positioned near the gate desk, an unused prop in this unfolding drama. "I'm happy to demonstrate it fits." Karen leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping, taking on a subtly condescending edge. "Sir, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know a too large bag when I see one. My decision is final. Either you check it, or you will not be boarding this flight." Her eyes held a challenging glint, a silent dare. Other passengers were now queuing behind David, some casting curious glances, others simply eager to board. The pressure of the line was a silent ally for Karen. David felt the familiar sting of an invisible wall rising, not based on logic or rules, but on an arbitrary exercise of power. He knew, instinctively, that this wasn't about the bag. He had encountered this particular brand of passive aggression before, the microaggression veiled in bureaucracy. He maintained his composure, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she seemed to crave. "There's clearly a misunderstanding," he stated, his voice even, though a steelier undertone was now discernible. "I have critical meetings in Berlin. Denying me boarding for a compliant bag is unreasonable." Karen let out a soft, almost inaudible sniff of contempt. A faint, dismissive smile played on her lips. "Unreasonable? I'm simply doing my job, sir. Perhaps you should have done yours and read the rules more carefully." She then gestured dismissively towards the back of the queue. "Next passenger, please. We have a schedule to keep." With that, she turned her attention to the next person, effectively dismissing David, cutting him off mid-sentence. The message was clear. His arguments, his status, his entire purpose meant absolutely nothing to her. He stood there for a long moment, watching her mechanical interaction with the next passenger. The feeling wasn't rage, not yet. It was a cold, quiet realization of a systemic flaw, a deliberate application of power without accountability. He finally stepped away from the gate, his jaw clenched, but his face still an unreadable mask. Karen didn't even glance up as he retreated. She was confident, completely, fatally confident. David Ndlovu walked away from gate B23, the low hum of the terminal now seeming to pulse with an almost oppressive thrum. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, carrying him to a less crowded section of the waiting area, near a large window overlooking the tarmac. The engines of the very plane he was supposed to be on were now powering up, a deep, resonant growl vibrating through the glass. He watched it for a moment, a cold, analytical gaze in his eyes, devoid of overt anger, but brimming with a profound resolve. His initial instinct, the one most people would succumb to, was to unleash a torrent of justified indignation, to demand a supervisor, to cause a scene. But David was not most people. He was a strategist, a builder of systems, and a meticulous deconstructor of flaws. The incident wasn't just a personal affront. It was an undeniable, infuriating demonstration of systemic abuse of power cloaked in the mundane guise of airport bureaucracy. Karen Miller was merely a symptom, a visible crack in a much larger, compromised structure. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and retrieved his smartphone. It wasn't just any smartphone. It was a specially secured device, designed for encrypted communications and access to highly sensitive, restricted networks. Its sleek, black surface reflected the distant glow of the runway lights. He did not dial a customer service number. He did not draft a scathing email to Altair Airlines' corporate complaints department. Such actions, he knew, would merely feed into the very system he intended to dismantle. Instead, David opened a secure application, its icon a discrete, unidentifiable symbol. He quickly typed a series of brief, coded messages. The recipients were not friends or colleagues, but contacts in a sphere far removed from typical corporate grievances. One message went to a senior liaison at the Office of Aviation Standards Compliance, OASC, a contact cultivated through his work on ethical AI in regulatory frameworks. Another went to a legal counsel specializing in civil rights litigation. A third, to a prominent investigative journalist known for uncovering corporate malfeasance. His fingers moved with a precise, almost surgical efficiency. He did not narrate the incident with emotional flourishes. His messages were factual, devoid of personal complaint, yet laden with a weight that transcended the simple act of a denied boarding. Keywords flashed across the screen before being encrypted and sent. Systematic protocol violations, discriminatory practices, unwarranted denial of service, precedent for immediate internal and external compliance audit, safety implications. He made 2 brief, whispered phone calls, the conversations lasting no more than a minute each. His voice was low, controlled, almost clinical. The incident demands immediate, comprehensive investigation. Yes, full scope. Focus on pattern recognition and cultural indicators. Assure complete anonymity of the initial report. It's time to test the integrity of the oversight. He wasn't merely filing a complaint. He was initiating an operation. He was activating his hidden mechanism, a network of influence, a deep understanding of regulatory levers, and an unshakable resolve to see justice served, not just for himself, but to rectify a systemic wrong. The plane he was supposed to be on was now a distant, rising speck against the bruised pre-dawn sky, carrying its unaware passengers towards Berlin. David Ndlovu, however, remained on the ground, a quiet architect of a storm about to break. He snapped his phone shut, the click a tiny, almost imperceptible sound that was, in reality, the hammer falling on the first nail of Altair Airlines' coffin. The war had begun, and Altair Airlines had no idea it was even fighting. The next few days at Altair Airlines passed in what seemed, on the surface, to be business as usual. Karen Miller continued her shifts at Gate B23, her dismissive attitude towards passengers unwavering. The incident with David Ndlovu was, to her, a forgotten trifle, another minor victory in her ongoing, self-appointed crusade to keep entitled passengers in line. She gossiped with her colleague, Mark, about a particularly difficult customer she'd handled recently, a thinly veiled reference to David, reveling in her perceived authority. Her direct supervisor, Jennifer, a woman in her 50s with a perpetually weary expression and a cynical view of corporate ethics, simply nodded, offering a perfunctory, "Good job, Karen," keeping things moving. Jennifer had long ago learned that rocking the boat brought more trouble than it was worth, and turning a blind eye to Karen's petty abuses was simply easier. However, beneath this veneer of routine, subtle tremors began to ripple through the corporate email servers of Altair Airlines. Initially, they were almost imperceptible, easily dismissed as standard bureaucratic noise. Emails began to arrive from an unfamiliar, yet official-sounding entity, the Office of Aviation Standards Compliance, OASC. The first few were generic, requests for quarterly flight statistics, general passenger complaint databases from the last 3 years, and standard operational expenditure reports. Middle management, including Jennifer, received these with a collective shrug. Just another audit, was the common refrain. Bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy does. They filed the requests, delegated the data compilation to junior staff, and mostly ignored them. Jennifer herself was too busy trying to juggle staffing shortages, and appease her own superiors to pay much attention to what seemed like routine compliance checks. She skimmed the OASC emails, seeing nothing immediately alarming, and dismissed them as the usual paper-pushing exercise. But the requests began to grow more specific, more frequent. Suddenly, OASC wasn't just asking for general data. They wanted detailed incident reports from specific flight numbers, precise timelines for baggage handling anomalies, the full disciplinary records for gate agents in the International Departures Terminal, and comprehensive training logs for customer service personnel. They even requested historical data on denial of boarding, incidents, and the specific reasons cited, cross-referenced with passenger demographics where available. Panic wasn't setting in yet, but a faint hum of unease was starting to resonate in the corporate halls. Kyle Reed, Vice President of Operations, received a summary of these increasingly pointed data requests from his subordinates. He frowned, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Oh yes, see, huh? What's their deal all of a sudden? We just had our annual safety review." His assistant, Sarah, a meticulous but easily flustered young woman, checked her records. "Sir, they're saying it's an unprecedented, unannounced compliance and operational integrity review. They cited recent internal whistleblowing concerns, but wouldn't elaborate." Whistleblowing? Kyle scoffed, but a prickle of genuine concern began to nag at him. Probably some disgruntled employee with a chip on their shoulder. Tell legal to keep an eye on it. Provide them with everything they ask for, but slowly. And make sure everything we send makes us look squeaky clean. His instruction was a silent directive to sanitize, to curate, to obfuscate where necessary, a standard operating procedure for many corporations facing external scrutiny. Meanwhile, David Ndlovu was far away, in Berlin, delivering his keynote address to thunderous applause. His presentation on ethical AI was a resounding success, earning him accolades and new business opportunities. Yet, even as he basked in the glow of professional achievement, a part of his mind was calmly observing the distant ripples he had set in motion. He knew the OASC was moving, quietly and methodically, exactly as planned. The first dominoes were falling, unseen by those who were about to be crushed beneath their weight. The invisible war had indeed begun. The routine, unannounced compliance review swiftly escalated from abstract data requests to a tangible, unsettling presence. One Tuesday morning, a trio of individuals, clearly from the OASC, materialized in the sterile, high-ceilinged lobby of Altair Airlines corporate headquarters. There was Anastasia Volkov, a woman in her early 30s, impeccably dressed, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Her quiet demeanor belied a formidable intellect and a relentless focus. With her were two other agents, a grizzled, experienced veteran named Marco, whose silence was more intimidating than any spoken word, and a younger, tech-savvy analyst, Liam, who carried a tablet like an extension of his own arm. Their arrival was understated, almost apologetic, yet it radiated an undeniable authority. They presented their credentials to a nervous receptionist, who immediately contacted Kyle Reed's office. Kyle, already on edge from the increasingly demanding email requests, met them in a sparsely furnished conference room. His attempts at corporate charm and offers of hospitality were met with polite, professional disinterest. "Mr. Reed," Anastasia began, her voice calm but firm, "we appreciate your cooperation. As per our mandate, this is a comprehensive operational and compliance audit. We'll require full access to all relevant departments, personnel, and records." "Of course, Agent Volkov," Kyle replied, forcing a smile. "Altair Airlines prides itself on transparency. We have nothing to hide. Just a bit unusual, all this. We've just completed our internal review, you see." Anastasia's gaze was unwavering. "We are aware of your internal processes, Mr. Reed. Our review is independent. We will begin with your gate operations, specifically focusing on passenger handling protocols and adherence to federal anti-discrimination guidelines." The specific mention of anti-discrimination guidelines sent a faint shiver down Kyle's spine, but he quickly dismissed it. "Right. Well, our gate agents are highly trained. Jennifer, the supervisor, is excellent. Been with us for years." Over the next few days, the OASC team became a quiet, omnipresent force within Altair. They moved through the labyrinthine corridors, observing, interviewing, meticulously documenting. They never raised their voices, never made accusations, but their very presence was a heavy, unspoken judgment. They weren't looking for quick answers. They were building a case, brick by painstaking brick. Karen Miller and her colleagues, initially, found them to be an irritating distraction. More government busybodies. Karen grumbled to Mark during a coffee break, rolling her eyes. Always looking for problems where there aren't any. She saw their presence as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience, a sign of overzealous bureaucracy. When Liam, the tech analyst, politely requested her login data for the passenger handling system and a record of her gate interactions, she complied with an exasperated sigh, still completely oblivious to the true nature of their scrutiny. Jennifer, Karen's supervisor, was a little more perturbed. She'd been called in for a series of informal chats with Anastasia. The questions were deceptively simple at first. Tell us about the typical day at the gate. What are the common passenger issues you face? But then, they began to pivot, subtly probing. How do you handle difficult passengers? Are there any informal, unwritten rules that develop in gate operations? Have you ever observed instances where a passenger's appearance or demeanor influenced a boarding decision? Jennifer, well-versed in corporate doublespeak, offered vague, non-committal answers, carefully omitting any mention of Karen's notorious conduct or her own role in overlooking it. She felt a growing discomfort, a sense that these weren't just routine questions. The OSC team didn't press. They listened, they observed, and they cross-referenced. Liam, hunched over his laptop in a temporary office, was quietly sifting through years of digital data, flight manifests, complaint logs, internal memos, even employee email archives. He was building complex matrices, searching for anomalies, for patterns that hinted at more than just isolated incidents. David Ndlovu remained an unseen architect. His name was meticulously scrubbed from all official OASC communications relating to the audit. To Altair Airlines, this was an impersonal, cold regulatory action. They couldn't connect it to the quiet, dignified black entrepreneur who had been denied boarding weeks ago. That was precisely David's intention. He understood that personal vengeance, while satisfying, was fleeting. Systemic change, however, required the impersonal, relentless grind of institutional power. The shadow of the investigation was deepening, and Altair Airlines, still largely in the dark, was about to feel its full, chilling weight. The OASC team's investigation began to move with a chilling, inexorable momentum. What started as a seemingly innocuous compliance review quickly transformed into a surgical excavation of Altair Airlines' hidden pathologies. Anastasia Volkov, with Marco's quiet, experienced support and Liam's digital prowess, peeled back layers of corporate veneer, exposing the rot beneath. Their focus narrowed, initially, to Gate B23 and the personnel assigned to it. Liam's data analysis revealed startling patterns. Numerous denial of boarding incidents at that specific gate showed a disproportionate number of passengers of color, often citing vague or subjective reasons like oversized carry-on or late check-in, despite evidence to the contrary in other airline systems. He found a statistically significant correlation between these denials and Karen Miller's shifts. More damningly, he uncovered a suspicious number of resolved customer satisfaction gestures, free flight vouchers, or upgrades, issued to passengers who later retracted complaints about Gate B23, effectively silencing them. This isn't random, Anastasia stated in a private meeting with her team, gesturing at a complex spreadsheet Liam had projected. This is a pattern, and the pattern points directly to Agent Miller. But it's not just her. She clicked to a new tab, displaying a hierarchy chart. Jennifer, her supervisor, has signed off on every one of those complaint retractions. And her performance reviews consistently laud Karen's efficiency and strict adherence to rules, even after multiple, albeit resolved, incidents. Marco, who had been conducting discreet, off-the-record conversations with other gate agents and ground staff, chimed in. There's a culture, Anastasia. Fear mostly. People are afraid to speak up about Karen. She's got a reputation for making life difficult. And Jennifer, she's known for managing expectations. It means, if you've got a problem with Karen, you just deal with it, or it comes back on you. The OASC team then escalated their interviews. They called in current and former Altair employees, assuring them of complete confidentiality and protection under federal whistleblowing laws. Initially, many were hesitant, their faces etched with the fear of professional retaliation. But Anastasia's calm, authoritative presence, combined with the irrefutable data presented by Liam, gradually chipped away at their silence. One junior gate agent, Maria, a young woman clearly terrified, finally broke down. She called them troublemakers, Maria whispered, referring to passengers Karen had singled out. She'd say, "Make an example of them. It teaches them a lesson." And Jennifer, she knew, she'd just tell us to handle it, to diffuse the situation if it got too loud, but never to question Karen's decisions. Maria recounted an instance where a family, traveling with a sick child, was denied boarding because of a 5-minute delay in reaching the gate, despite having valid tickets and being visually distraught. Karen had simply shrugged and said, "Rules are rules." Jennifer had then smoothed it over with a courtesy voucher, making the family sign a waiver. The investigation uncovered more allegations of petty theft from unattended bags, later attributed to a temporary contractor but poorly investigated, falsified equipment check reports, instances where overbooked flights led to aggressive, bumping tactics, often targeting vulnerable passengers. The case of David Ndlovu, initially just a trigger, now became a prism through which to view a much larger, uglier picture of systematic neglect and deliberate malfeasance. The very air at Altair Airlines headquarters began to thicken with an unspoken anxiety. Employees whispered in hushed tones in break rooms. Kyle Reed found his days consumed by emergency meetings, his face growing paler with each passing hour. Legal counsel was now permanently stationed in a war room, frantically trying to prepare responses to OASC's increasingly pointed inquiries. They're not just looking at a single incident, Kyle fretted to his lead counsel, Mark Brannigan. They're looking at everything. This isn't a random audit. Someone opened a can of worms, and they're letting it all spill out. He still had no idea who someone was, or what had truly initiated this relentless onslaught. But the question of why was becoming chillingly clear. The OASC wasn't just investigating a rule breaker. They were investigating a broken system, a system that Altair Airlines had, through neglect and complicity, allowed to fester. The rot was being unearthed, and the stench was starting to permeate every corner of the company. As the OASC's grip tightened, the boardroom of Altair Airlines transformed into a veritable war room. Kyle Reed, alongside the CEO, Anna Chun, a formidable, no-nonsense executive whose calm exterior now masked growing panic, and the lead counsel, Mark Brannigan, found themselves locked in an increasingly desperate struggle. The initial strategy of slow-walking requests and sanitizing data had failed spectacularly. Anastasia Volkov and her team were simply too thorough, too immune to corporate evasions. "They're surgical," Anna conceded, her voice tight, after another fruitless attempt to placate Anastasia with an offer of full internal cooperation. "Every document we hand over, they cross-reference with 3 others. Every interview we arrange, they conduct independently, with their own recording devices. They're not looking for our version of events, they're building their own." Kyle, his face now permanently etched with stress, pounded a fist lightly on the table. "This isn't just about some minor violations. They're digging into our hiring practices, our training manuals, even our employee grievance procedures from a decade ago. It feels like a vendetta, but for the life of me, I can't figure out against whom." Mark Brannigan, looking weary, spread out a stack of legal notices. "The OASC has issued subpoenas for several high-level executives to provide sworn testimony. They're also threatening to revoke operational licenses for several key personnel if we continue to obstruct." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the anxious faces. "They're not playing. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. They're going for blood." Their attempts to manage the situation grew increasingly frantic. They tried to identify the whistleblower, deploying their own internal security to monitor employee communications, a move that only deepened the fear and mistrust among staff. They offered promotions and bonuses to loyal employees, hoping to solidify their ranks against the OASC's probing questions. They even attempted to discredit the OASC team, subtly leaking rumors to compliant media outlets about the heavy-handed tactics of government overreach, portraying Altair as a victim of bureaucratic tyranny. But these tactics, designed to work within the familiar confines of corporate politics, proved utterly ineffective against the OASC. Anastasia Volkov was completely unswayed by their maneuvers. "Our investigation is based on facts and evidence, not public relations campaigns," she informed Kyle in a terse phone call, her voice cutting through his carefully constructed corporate veneer. "Any further attempts to obstruct or intimidate witnesses will be met with the full force of federal law." Unseen by them, David Ndlovu remained the quiet conductor of this symphony of regulatory unraveling. He was not personally making threats or issuing demands. Instead, through his carefully cultivated network, the senior OASC liaison, the civil rights attorney, the investigative journalist, he was ensuring that the higher, impartial system operated with maximum efficiency and minimal interference. He provided the OASC team with subtle but crucial intelligence: where to look for specific hidden reports, which past cases to re-examine, which employees might have information but were too afraid to speak. He didn't dictate, he guided, his influence a phantom hand ensuring the investigation never lost its way. He knew that Altire's executives would try to obfuscate, to deflect, to use their power to silence. His strategy was to ensure that the OASC, once activated, had the resources, the legal backing, and the moral imperative to be utterly relentless. He had empowered them, ensuring their independence was sacrosanct. The powerful executives of Altire Airlines, accustomed to operating with impunity, were now facing an adversary that couldn't be bought, intimidated, or sweet-talked. They were flailing in the dark, desperately trying to fight a ghost, completely unaware that the man they had so arrogantly dismissed weeks ago was meticulously pulling the strings of their imminent downfall, ensuring that the system designed to protect the powerful was now being used to hold them accountable. The ground beneath them was steadily crumbling, and they still didn't understand why or who was responsible. The OASC investigation, initially perceived as a targeted probe into isolated incidents, was now undeniably exposing a systemic malaise within Altire Airlines. The rot that Anastasia's team unearthed wasn't confined to a single gate agent or a single supervisor. It permeated the corporate culture, reaching upward through middle management and casting a long shadow over the executive suite. Liam's analysis, presented in stark, undeniable infographics, revealed that the pattern of discriminatory denials and managed complaints wasn't an anomaly. It was a de facto policy, informally encouraged or tacitly permitted to maintain operational efficiency and avoid the perceived inconvenience of difficult passengers. Training materials, when scrutinized, contained subtle biases, emphasizing discretionary power over equitable treatment. Internal audits, supposedly designed to catch such issues, were found to be superficial, rubber-stamped by complacent managers who prioritized maintaining a veneer of compliance over genuine ethical oversight. "This isn't just about one bad apple, Mr. Reed," Anastasia stated calmly during another tense meeting with Kyle, Anna Chun, and Mark Brannigan. A large screen behind her displayed a flowchart, illustrating how numerous incidents, including a significant number of lost baggage, claims that were never fully investigated, and several unaddressed near-miss safety reports, had been systematically downplayed, miscategorized, or outright buried. This is about a corporate culture that has allowed, and in some cases, actively fostered, an environment of systemic bias and disregard for established protocols. The legal team, led by Mark Brannigan, was in damage control overdrive. They realized the implications were far more severe than monetary fines. This was a direct threat to Altire's operating license, its public trust, and its very existence. News of the OASC's presence, though officially muted, began to seep into the public consciousness. A prominent aviation blog ran a speculative piece about unprecedented regulatory scrutiny at a major airline, citing anonymous sources. Then, a few days later, a more reputable financial news outlet reported a significant drop in Altire Airlines stock, likely due to investor concerns over ongoing, undisclosed regulatory challenges. These controlled leaks, subtly orchestrated by David Ndlovu's investigative journalist contact, were designed to apply external pressure, to amplify the OASC's efforts, and to ensure that the public, and thus the markets, began to take notice. The financial losses, though not yet catastrophic, were a painful reality check for Altair's board members, who started demanding answers from Anna Chun and Kyle Reed. "Our brand is taking a hit," a stern board member declared during an emergency video conference. "Our stock is down almost 8% this week. We need to know what's going on and how we're going to make this investigation disappear." Anna Chun, usually unflappable, looked visibly strained. "We are fully cooperating, gentlemen. But the OASC is being incredibly aggressive. They're making a case that our entire operational structure, and frankly, our corporate ethics, are compromised." She omitted the detail that the OASC's aggressiveness was a direct response to her own attempts to stonewall. Kyle Reed, now hollow-eyed, felt the ground shifting beneath him. The incident with the black entrepreneur at Gate B23, which he had dismissed as trivial, now loomed like a monstrous shadow, the genesis of their present catastrophe. He still didn't know the man's name, or how he could have wielded such power, but the connection was becoming horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a random audit, it was a targeted demolition. The revelations continued to mount. Evidence emerged of employees being pressured to ignore minor safety faults to maintain flight schedules, of a quota system for denying boarding on overbooked flights that disproportionately affected certain demographics, and a pervasive culture of fear that discouraged internal reporting of misconduct. The OASC wasn't just investigating a few bad actors. They were exposing a corporation whose very foundations were built on a precarious blend of arrogance, complacency, and systemic injustice. The threat was no longer merely to Karen Miller's job or Jennifer's. It was a threat to Kyle Reed's career, to Anna Chen's legacy, and ultimately, to Altair Airlines itself. The hire system that David Ndlovu had quietly activated was not content with superficial reforms. It was demanding a complete reckoning, a thorough cleansing, revealing that the local, corrupt system protecting Altair's executives was far more fragile than they had ever imagined. The invisible war was turning into a siege, and Altair Airlines was losing on every front. The atmosphere within Altair Airlines headquarters had curdled into a potent cocktail of fear, paranoia, and open hostility. The quiet whispers had morphed into frantic, hushed conversations, and the forced smiles had vanished entirely. Everyone knew someone who had been interviewed by the OASC, and the stories filtering back were grim. Employees were being offered immunity in exchange for testimony, a clear sign that the regulatory body was building a criminal case, not just a civil one. Karen Miller, still working at Gate B23, could feel the walls closing in, though she still hadn't grasped the full picture. Her usual bluster had evaporated, replaced by a sullen, watchful silence. Her colleagues avoided her, their eyes darting away whenever she approached. Jennifer, her supervisor, no longer offered even perfunctory nods of approval. Instead, she looked at Karen with a mixture of resentment and barely concealed terror, as if Karen were a ticking time bomb. "What's going on?" Karen demanded of Jennifer one afternoon, her voice sharper than usual. "Why is everyone acting so weird? And those government people keep asking about my logs. What did I do?" Jennifer, her face ashen, merely shook her head. "Just do your job, Karen. Don't make waves." Her evasiveness was a stark contrast to her usual casual dismissal of Karen's antics. The silence that followed was more damning than any accusation. Karen, for the first time in a long time, felt a prickle of genuine fear. Her absolute certainty of impunity was cracking. The familiar comfort of her unchallenged authority was dissolving. Meanwhile, in the executive suite, panic was giving way to a desperate, last-ditch effort to identify their mysterious antagonist. Kyle Reed and Anna Chun, having exhausted all conventional methods, were now obsessed with finding the origin point of this unprecedented audit. They had scoured internal records, checked for disgruntled former employees, and even engaged private investigators to look for any major public incident that could have triggered such a devastating response. "There's nothing," Kyle fumed, slamming his hand on his desk. "No major accident, no public outcry that justifies this level of scrutiny. It's like it came out of nowhere. A ghost in the machine." "It's not a ghost, Kyle," Anna corrected, her voice brittle. "It's someone with immense influence and a very long memory. And they're systematically destroying us." She stared at a complex timeline projected on the wall, meticulously charting the OASC's escalating actions. "The origin point," according to the OASC's vague statements, was simply recent whistleblowing concerns. But no whistleblower had come forward publicly. No name was ever mentioned by the OASC. They reviewed footage from every flight delay, every customer complaint, every gate incident from the past 2 months. They watched countless interactions, searching for that single spark. They saw Karen Miller, repeatedly. They saw her dismissive attitude. They saw her denying boarding. They even saw the incident with David Ndlovu, captured by a wide-angle security camera. But to Kyle and Anna, it was just another difficult passenger, quickly forgotten in the daily grind. They couldn't conceive that such a seemingly minor interaction could be the catalyst for their impending ruin. They still didn't know his name, nor did they possess any understanding of his true capacity for influence. The attempts to pinpoint David Ndlovu failed because he was deliberately operating outside their known spheres of influence. His initial report to the OASC was highly protected, its source encrypted and anonymized. His subsequent guidance to the investigative team was channeled through secure, non-attributable means, often leveraging his connections in the tech world to obscure digital footprints. He was the quiet strategist, moving pieces on a chessboard that Altair's executives didn't even realize they were playing on. As the OASC moved towards its final stages of evidence collection, issuing final demands for documents, and preparing its summary report, the full weight of their impending doom began to settle on Altair Airlines. The fear was no longer about fines or bad press. It was about the very real possibility of criminal charges, the loss of their operating license, and the collapse of an entire institution. The last days of impunity had dawned, dark and foreboding, for those who had so carelessly wielded their power, and they remained tragically, fatally, ignorant of the architect of their destruction. The executive boardroom, once a stage for Altair Airlines' triumphs, was now a stark, unforgiving tribunal. The day that Kyle Reed had dreaded, the hour X from his premonition, had arrived with a devastating finality. The room hummed with a different kind of chaos than the one from the prologue, not frantic, but a choked, terrified silence punctuated by the clipped, precise words of Anastasia Volkov. Anna Chun, Kyle Reed, and Mark Brannigan sat opposite Anastasia, Marco, and Liam, their faces a tableau of abject defeat. The immense flat-screen monitor, which had flashed the emergency news report weeks earlier, now displayed a meticulously organized presentation titled OASC Final Report, Systemic Violations and Corporate Malfeasance at Altair Airlines. Anastasia stood before them, a figure of unwavering authority. Over the past 6 weeks, she began, her voice devoid of emotion. Our investigation has uncovered a pervasive pattern of operational protocol violations, discriminatory practices, and a culture of corporate impunity that extends from your frontline staff to the highest levels of management. Liam clicked a button, and the screen transitioned. The executives gasped. It was a crystal-clear video from Gate B23, time-stamped 6 weeks ago. It showed David Ndlovu, calm and dignified, presenting his boarding pass. It showed Karen Miller, her face a mask of condescension, refusing him boarding under a spurious pretext. The audio, enhanced and perfectly synchronized, captured Karen's dismissive tone, her veiled sarcasm, and David's composed, logical arguments met with her rigid, petty authority. This, Anastasia continued, was the initial catalyst for our investigation. A clear, undeniable act of discriminatory denial of service, based on subjective judgment rather than objective protocol. The screen then exploded into a mosaic of similar incidents. Grainy footage from other gates, audio recordings of supervisors dismissing legitimate complaints, emails from lower-level employees detailing harassment and pressure to ignore rules. There was Maria's tearful testimony, played anonymously, describing Karen's discriminatory remarks and Jennifer's complicity. There were internal memos, previously suppressed, outlining strategies to manage inconvenient passenger demographics. Each piece of evidence was meticulously cross-referenced, irrefutable, painting a picture of deliberate, systemic rot. Kyle Reed watched, his face ashen, the blood draining from it as he connected the dots. The difficult passenger from weeks ago, the name on the OASC report cover. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He glanced at Anna Chun, whose steely composure had finally fractured, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrible comprehension. And finally, Anastasia said, her voice dropping slightly, the primary complainant in this case, the individual whose experience ignited this entire inquiry, wished to offer a direct statement. The screen shifted again. This time, it showed a live, encrypted video feed. There, on the screen, was David Ndlovu. He sat in a minimalist office, his posture as impeccable and composed as ever. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze calm, intelligent, and utterly unyielding. My experience with Altair Airlines was not an isolated incident, David began, his voice clear and resonant, devoid of anger, but imbued with immense gravitas. It was a manifestation of a deeply flawed system, one that prioritized arbitrary power over passenger rights and systemic neglect over ethical conduct. My intent was not personal retribution, but to ensure that such practices are brought to light and rectified, ensuring that no one else suffers similar, or worse, indignities due to corporate negligence and unchecked authority. Kyle Reed stared at the screen, at the face of the man he had so utterly underestimated. The calm, dignified black entrepreneur. The man who, with a few quiet phone calls, had activated a mechanism far more powerful than Altair Airlines could ever conceive. The truth, in that moment, was a sledgehammer. David Ndlovu hadn't just complained. He had meticulously orchestrated their downfall, exposing every hidden flaw, every concealed transgression. The climax was not a shouting match, but a cold, irrefutable presentation of facts, culminating in the serene, powerful presence of the man they had dismissed as insignificant. Kyle's jaw dropped, a single, horrifying word forming silently on his lips, Ndlovu. His fatal underestimation had come home to roost. The revelations from the OASC report and David Ndlovu's calm, damning testimony reverberated through the aviation industry like a seismic shockwave. The public announcement, made by the OASC director himself in a packed press conference, was stark and uncompromising. Effective immediately, the director declared, his voice grave, the Office of Aviation Standards Compliance is issuing a temporary, indefinite suspension of Altair Airlines' operating license. This unprecedented action is a direct result of a comprehensive audit revealing systemic violations of federal aviation regulations, persistent discriminatory practices against passengers, and a pervasive culture of unaddressed safety concerns and corporate malfeasance. The news exploded across every major media outlet. Headlines screamed, Altair Airlines grounded by discrimination scandal, systemic corruption exposed at major airline. OASC halts Altair flights indefinitely. Images of grounded Altair planes and distraught passengers filled news channels, contrasting sharply with the stoic, authoritative faces of OASC officials. The consequences were swift and brutal. Karen Miller, the gate agent, was not just fired. She was publicly identified as a key instigator of discriminatory practices. The OASC, in collaboration with federal prosecutors, announced that she would face charges related to civil rights violations and potentially perjury for misleading investigators. Her smug confidence had dissolved into public disgrace and legal jeopardy. Her direct supervisor, Jennifer, also faced immediate dismissal. Her complicity in covering up Karen's actions, her active role in managing complaints, and her failure to uphold ethical standards resulted in the revocation of her professional aviation management certifications. She would never work in the industry again. For Kyle Reed, Vice President of Operations, and Anna Chun, the CEO, the repercussions were far more severe. The OASC's report detailed their direct involvement in creating and perpetuating a corporate culture that not only tolerated but implicitly encouraged these illicit practices. Evidence presented included emails from Kyle downplaying safety reports and from Anna approving cost-cutting measures that compromised operational integrity. Both were immediately removed from their positions by an emergency board meeting, their reputations utterly destroyed. Furthermore, federal prosecutors announced the opening of criminal investigations into both executives for obstruction of justice, corporate negligence, and potentially fraud related to the deliberate misrepresentation of compliance data. Their world of power and privilege crumbled, replaced by the grim reality of legal battles and public shame. Altair Airlines itself faced multi-million-dollar fines, the immediate grounding of its entire fleet, and the complete evisceration of its public trust. Experts predicted the airline would struggle to ever recover, likely facing bankruptcy or a forced takeover. The proud name, once a symbol of air travel, was now synonymous with corporate greed and systemic injustice. David Ndlovu, observing the unfolding cascade of consequences from a quiet, undisclosed location, felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction. His objective had been justice, not vengeance. The news reports confirmed that the higher, impartial system he had activated had worked precisely as intended. It had taken time, meticulous effort, and unwavering resolve, but the corrupt, local system that had shielded Altair's executives and allowed petty tyranny to flourish had finally been exposed and dismantled. The verdict was in, and it was absolute. Weeks turned into months. The dust of Altair Airlines' spectacular collapse began to settle, leaving behind a landscape irrevocably altered. The empty terminals, once bustling with life, stood as stark monuments to unchecked power and systemic failure. Yet, from the ashes of one corporation's demise, a new movement for accountability was born. David Ndlovu, ever the strategist, emerged not as a vindicated victim, but as a driving force for industry-wide reform. He declined all major media interviews that sought to sensationalize his personal story. Instead, he made a single, impactful appearance on a respected, nonpartisan news program, not as the entrepreneur who grounded an airline, but as a member of a newly formed advisory group for aviation ethics and equity. "My intention," David explained to the calm, seasoned interviewer, his voice measured and articulate, "was never punitive. It was preventative. The incident I experienced was not unique. It was symptomatic of a broader issue within the industry. A lack of transparent oversight, insufficient accountability for frontline staff, and a corporate culture that too often prioritized profit and convenience over fundamental human dignity and civil rights." He wasn't gloating, he was educating. He outlined the advisory group's proposals: mandatory, unbiased diversity and inclusion training for all airline personnel, independent oversight mechanisms for passenger complaint resolution, enhanced data analytics to proactively identify patterns of discriminatory behavior, and most crucially, a clearer, faster pathway for federal regulators like the OASC to intervene when systemic issues are identified. The goal, he concluded, is to build systems that are inherently fair, robust, and beyond the reach of individual prejudice or corporate complacency. His actions resonated far beyond the aviation sector. Regulators in other industries began to review their own compliance protocols, recognizing the vulnerability exposed by the Altair scandal. The Ndlovu effect, as some pundits termed it, became shorthand for the power of meticulous, strategic intervention against entrenched injustice. The final scene finds David Ndlovu months later, at a different airport, for a different airline. He is dressed simply, his carry-on bag, the very same, compliant one, by his side. He walks with the same calm purpose, his demeanor unchanged, his inner compass set firmly on justice and equity. He approaches the gate, presents his boarding pass, and the agent, a young woman with a genuine smile, processes it efficiently. There is no challenge, no microaggression, just the smooth, respectful execution of a service. As he waits in the boarding area, a large television screen above him plays a news report. The anchor is discussing the ongoing reforms in the aviation industry, highlighting the sweeping changes initiated in the wake of the Altair Airlines scandal. The report details stricter federal guidelines, increased penalties for discrimination, and new initiatives to foster a more inclusive travel environment. A new airline, born from the ashes of Altair, is shown unveiling its commitment to unwavering passenger respect and transparent accountability. David watches for a moment, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of satisfaction gracing his lips. He isn't interested in personal accolades or public recognition. His triumph lies in the systemic shift, in the assurance that the mechanism he activated has brought about a tangible, positive change. He finally hears his boarding group called, gathers his bag, and walks towards the jet bridge. As he steps onto the plane, looking forward to his destination, the audience is left with a profound sense of catharsis. Justice, cold, calculated, and ultimately transformative, has been served, proving that true power doesn't reside in arrogance, but in the unwavering pursuit of a fairer world.